Hello, this is the second part in my recent trailing stop series. In the first part, in case you didn't see it, I demonstrated 3 different types of trailing stop, but they all had in common one thing, and that is that all trades had the same stop loss price applied, at least once the trade got into a profit. So I said that I would be demonstrating some other types of techniques, and this is the first of those follow-ups. Today I'm going to show a trailing stop where each trade can have a different trailing stop based on the entry price of the trade. This is what I refer to as an expanding trailing stop, and I'll show in a moment how that works. To write this code, I am going to be taking the code from the earlier video and simply modifying it, and I'll be going through that fairly quickly. So I'm not going to be explaining anything in the earlier video, I'm just going to explain the changes I'm making. So if you haven't seen the earlier video, you may want to go back and see that, and I'll leave a link in the description of this video so you can find part 1. I'm also going to be writing this code for both MetaTrader 4 and 5 at the same time. Most of the code in the 2 earlier videos is the same, so I had a separate video for MetaTrader 4 and for MetaTrader 5, but because most of that code is the same and I'm reusing a lot of the code, I don't think it's worth creating 2 separate videos. So there'll just be this one, and I will switch between MetaTrader 4 and 5 as I get to sections where the 2 of them are different. But for the most part, I'm going to be writing the code in MetaTrader 5 or in the MT5 editor, and then where I get to a piece of code that is different between 4 and 5, I will switch to the MetaTrader 4 editor and show that at the time. But to further explain the expanding trailing stop, I am going to be implementing a number of settings on this. The first one will be a minimum stop loss, because typically a trailing stop kicks in when you get to a break-even point. I'm going to allow you to set a point that's better than that so that you at least get some small profit if you want to. It's also a trailing stop that will begin, and then the gap between the current price or the current best price and the stop loss will gradually increase. So you're able to set a fairly tight stop loss initially, and that gap will increase to give your trade more breathing room as you go further into profit until it reaches a maximum. Now it might be better if I just try to explain this, so I'm going to jump onto a whiteboard and I'll draw out what I mean by this and try to explain it on the whiteboard before we get into writing the code for this expert advisor. Now let me try to explain using a whiteboard in a very clumsy way how this particular trailing stop works. So let's say that the price is currently here. And I'm going to do this for a buy trade. The sell trade's just the opposite. So I enter a trade here, and the price over time increases. I know it's not normally going to go in a straight line like that, but this is just the demonstration. The first thing I'm adding into this trailing stop is a minimum profit. So typically a trailing stop starts out as soon as the stop loss would be at the entry point. That's here. But that just gives you a break even if you come back and hit it. I'm allowing you to set a minimum profit level. And if you want to, you can set the minimum profit level to 0, but let's just say you've set one, then there's a minimum profit here. Okay. So nothing actually happens when the price gets to that minimum profit level. That's just the level where the original trailing stop will be set. So the next thing we need to hit is the trailing stop amount. So let's just say that's here. And then this distance between these two, that's the minimum trailing stop. Okay, so at that point, and I'll just change color here, at that point I would set a stop loss here. So if we do happen to come back then and hit the trailing stop, we'll at least have made the minimum profit. So that's the point where the stop loss begins, as soon as the price is this minimum trailing stop above that minimum profit level. At that point though, my trailing stop won't simply follow this price increase line. It will move up at a lower rate, like so. And in my code, I'm going to set that at half the rate that this goes up. But there is opportunity for you to change that if you want to. And it will continue to do that until I hit another level. I'll just draw this one in here, where this gap now you go, where that is the maximum trailing stop. Okay, and so once the price or the stop loss price has reached this maximum trailing stop behind the current price, change color again, and here, then the stop loss will begin to increase parallel to the price increase. So I hope that shows up, that you can see that this line is, as roughly as I can draw, parallel to the price increase, and this line is increasing at only half the rate, or a lower rate. So that's the way this particular trailing stop works. Now, the use case for this might be, you want to set a trailing stop early, you want to have a small amount of profit, could be zero if you set minimum profit to zero. You want to set that trailing stop early just in case there's an unexpected price reversal. But once you have that trailing stop in place and you've got some guaranteed profit, you don't want to keep the trailing stop too close to the price. You want to give the trade some room to breathe. And so you want that trailing stop to increase. And this is a situation where the trailing stop will increase, giving the trade more time to breathe. So if the price is actually moving around a little instead of a nice straight line, you're actually getting some more space for that trailing stop. But just in case things went wrong at this early point and the price dropped off, you would at least make your minimum profit. So that's the use case for it. And now let's go to the code and I'll show you how I will write this. I'm in the MetaTrader 5 editor now, and you might remember from the last video on trailing stops, I had this MA Cross Common trailing stop. I've just created a folder for MA Cross TS Expanding. I'm just going to copy these two into that folder, and then I'll rename them and modify these to be the expanding trailing stop. Now I'm making these changes for MetaTrader 4 and 5. Most of the changes are going to be common, so it's easier to make a single video and show both of these, and I'll do it at the same time. So first I just open up the MetaTrader 5 version. I'll also open up the MT4 version in the same editor, but I'll have to go to the MetaTrader 4 editor when I want to compile this. So first I'll just replace this comment, and I won't show the changes in the MetaTrader 4 version unless they are different to the MetaTrader 5 version. The name of the application is going to change a little, so just MA Cross with an expanding trailing stop. I'm only going to have a single method, so I'll eliminate this trailing stop method. There'll be no choice of a trailing stop method in this Export Advisor. I still have a fast moving average and a slow moving average. They're the basics. I still have stop loss points and take profit points. Just change all of this for the trailing stop. So to explain what I've got here, there's an int which is trailing stop minimum points, and that's where I told you how far the trailing stop must be ahead of the minimum profit. There's the trailing stop maximum points, and that's the point where the trailing stop will begin to follow the price exactly. And then there's the trailing stop profit points. That's the minimum profit that I want to make on each trade. I no longer need this input trailing stop in profit. I can just delete that. I still need the handles for the fast and the slow, but I've eliminated the ATR with this particular trailing stop, so I can get rid of the handle and the buffer for the ATR values. Now, I still have a stop loss and a take profit, which is where I'm converting the inputs, which are in points, into a double. But now I have different values for trailing stop. I've got the trailing stop min, max, and profit. Next change is on init. Again, trailing stop's been replaced now by the min, max, and the profit. That's just these three values here. Still setting up the handles for the fast and the slow moving average. I'm still checking that they are both valid. I no longer have this trailing stop method and the ATR, so I'll just eliminate that little block of code. And I don't need to release the ATR. And a lot here becomes simpler. I don't have a switch for the trailing stop method. In fact, I'm just going to delete that entire block. And I can also delete this block because this particular trailing stop updates every tick, and there is only one call to this, so I will just add that in. And so this will be a call to a function, update trailing stop. I already have that function, but I'm going to modify it. And the three arguments will be the trailing stop min, the trailing stop max, and the trailing stop profit. And I've mentioned this on several other videos. Yes, these are global variables and I could simply use them inside this function, but I prefer to write functions that take arguments because that way the functions become more generic and can be used in other places. In general, the use of global variables is not a good idea. It is inflexible and prone to error later. So I tend to use my global variables inside these event handlers because that's the only way of keeping track of data from one call to the next and of sharing data between the event handlers. But once I'm calling functions from these event handlers, I like to pass these values. And that's a rule that you'll find that I break occasionally. But for today, I'm passing in the trailing stop min, max, and profit to this update trailing stop function. The rest of this code is just about opening trades for the simple moving average cross, so nothing to change there. Nothing to change in the trade open. I'm still opening it, and here's a case where I am using a global variable inside a function, the input order size and the input trade comment. Like I said, it's a rule that I break occasionally. The trailing stop functions, now these are left over from the earlier iteration, so I had a simple, a high, low, and an ATR type trailing stop. I don't need those anymore. So here's the one update trailing stop function, but the arguments to this are changing. So I'll just paste in new arguments, the minimum, the maximum, and the trailing stop profit. And inside here is where it becomes quite different because the code for this originally was where every trade has the same trailing stop price. So all the buy trades would be trailing at the same price level and all the sell trades would be trailing at the same price level. With this version, each trade can have a different trailing stop price. And so if you think about the way it's calculated, each trade is going to hit that minimum profit at a different time. Then their trailing stop is going to expand slowly until it reaches the maximum. Once a trailing stop has reached the maximum, of course, they'll all have the same price, but up to that point, every trade may have a different price. So I'm going to be calculating that trailing stop price for each position. I'll just create a variable for it to begin with. So this is trailing stop price, and I'm initializing that to 0. This loop is the same for int I equals positions total minus 1, I is greater than or equal to 0, I minus minus. Now here is a place where MetaTrader 4 is different, so let's just switch over to that. Now not a big difference, but in MetaTrader 4 I've set this success variable, Boolean, and I've just initialized that to true. I'm not using it, and I might have mentioned that in the earlier video, but I'm using that to capture the results of each modification. I'm still having the double trailing stop price equal to 0, but for MetaTrader 4, for int I equals orders total minus 1, I is greater than or equal to 0, I minus minus. So I'll go back to MetaTrader 5 where it uses positions total. Same syntax, almost the same statement, just positions total compared to orders total for MetaTrader 4. I explained this select position function in the last video. It simply takes care of selecting the position based on the index, this I, and comparing that position to make sure it is for this symbol and the magic number for this expert. Now here I'll also make a change. In the MetaTrader 4 version I called it select order. It does the same thing, but I'm going to change that to select position. I'm just going to change the name of the function so that it's even more common between MetaTrader 4 and 5. And here is the function in MetaTrader 4. I'm just going to change the name. There's nothing else to do in here. It's still doing the same work. I'm just changing the name of the function. And now at this point, I have a selected position and I'm able to calculate the trailing stop price for that position. So I'm going to do that by calling a separate function called getTSPrice, and I'll go to that in a moment. I just want to finish off the update trailing stop first. So the trailing stop price equals getTSPrice, passing in that minimum, maximum, and trailing stop profit. And I'm able to use the currently selected position because these positions functions are global. So I don't need to pass in any information about that position because it's already in memory. And if this returns a 0 for the trailing stop price, then I really can't set a trailing stop, so I'll just continue and go around to the next iteration of this loop. Now the rest of the changes inside this update trailing stop, I don't have this trailing stop in profit flag anymore, and I don't have a buy and a sell trailing stop. I just have the one trailing stop. So I'm just going to replace all of this code. I've just replaced it for the buy side initially so that you can see what the difference here is. So I'm still saying if the stop loss is equal to 0 or the new trailing stop price is greater than the stop loss for a buy, it'll be less than for a sell. And the trailing stop price is greater than or equal to the current price open plus the trailing stop profit here. So that gives me that minimum profit amount. So as long as the trailing stop price is greater than or equal to that, then I can call this other function that I'm about to write called apply trailing stop and trailing stop price. And really this function is just wrapping up this trade.position modify. If I make the same change on the sell, stop loss is equal to 0 currently, trailing stop price in this case is less than the current stop loss, and trailing stop price is less than or equal to the open price minus the trailing stop profit. Then I can call apply trailing stop for that trailing stop price. So there are two functions that I have to show you, the get trailing stop price and the apply trailing stop. But I'm just going to jump into MetaTrader 4 first and make these same changes in the update trailing stop on MetaTrader 4. So after select position, I calculate that trailing stop price. I'm using the same function name, get trailing stop price, with the same arguments. If the trailing stop price is equal to 0, continue, does the same thing. It will go back to the next iteration of this loop. Just replacing on the buy side first. And actually I'm going to remove that success because I don't need that anymore. But here, instead of using position values, I'm using order stop loss, order open price, and everything else here is the same then as it is in the MetaTrader 5 version. And replace the cell as well. So now back to MetaTrader 5, and I'll create this get TS price function and the apply trailing stop. I'll actually do apply trailing stop first because that's simple, and get trailing stop price has a little bit of calculation in it that I'll need to explain. So apply trailing stop. This assumes that I have a position already selected, so I'm simply calling trade.position modify. Position info.ticket gives me the ticket number for the currently selected position. This is the trailing stop price, and the second argument to that position modify is the take profit, and I'm just passing in the existing take profit from that position. So it's a very simple function. I just put it there to wrap everything up and make it a little neater. And also partly because I'm planning in the next video to show how I can make all of this code common between MetaTrader 4 and 5, so I don't have to switch between them and write it twice. And now that I've said that, I'll go to MetaTrader 4 and I'll write the same apply trailing stop function there. So MetaTrader 4, same name of function, still takes the same argument, double trailing stop price. Here I'm calling order modify, and it has some additional arguments, but also the current order is in memory, so I'm able to use order ticket to get the ticket number. Order open price is one of the arguments that you need for order modify, the trailing stop price, the current order take profit, and the current order expiration. So it's a different function, and this returns a Boolean, which I'll get a compiler warning if I do nothing with it, so I'm simply saying bool success equals that. I'm not using this success, you might want to, but I'm just capturing it so that I can eliminate that compiler warning. So back to MetaTrader 5, and I will explain the get trailing stop function. I'll just paste the entire function in, and then I'll step through it line by line and explain what's happening. So get trailing stop price, 3 arguments, the minimum, the maximum for the trailing stop, and that minimum profit. I'm just setting up some working variables here. The price, that will be the ultimate trailing stop price. The trail is the amount that I'm going to trail by. The minimum profit, once I've added this profit to the current price, that's the minimum profit price, the minimum trail price, trail range, current price, and you'll see how they're used. The logic is going to be the same in MetaTrader 4, but some of the values, so for example, position info.position type is going to be replaced by order type in MetaTrader 4. So if the type %2, so although this is an enum, enums are just integers, and %2 will convert this to a buy or a sell. I know that position type can really only be buy or sell, but this is just a shortcut, and it helps with MetaTrader 4 as well. So if I'm processing a buy trade, the current price I can get from symbol info double position info.symbol. Now I could have called chart symbol, but I'm not quite sure if that's what you're processing, so I'm using the symbol from the position. and getting the bid price. So that's the close price for a buy trade. The minimum profit price then is that opening price for the trade with position info.price open plus the profit, which is this argument that was passed in. The minimum trail price is going to be the minimum profit price plus that min, which is the minimum trail. So this is actually the price where I can begin applying a trailing stop. And the trail range is just the difference between the current price, which is here, and the minimum trail price. So this is how far I am ahead of the minimum trail price. And if I haven't reached that minimum trail price yet, this is going to come back as a negative number. So you'll see how that's handled. As I mentioned on the whiteboard, I'm going to trail at half the rate of the price increase until I reach that maximum trail. So the trail value is the minimum, that's the argument passed in here, plus the trail range, which is the difference between prices divided by 2. So half of the difference between the current price and the minimum trail price. And then I'm just checking if the trail is less than the minimum. So if this calculation returns something less than minimum, which will happen if the trail range is negative. As I said, this can be a negative value. Then just return 0 because I haven't reached a point yet where I can even apply that trailing stop. Also, if the trail is greater than the max, then the trail equals the max. So once I get to a point where that function returns a value that is greater than the maximum trail, I just want to set it to the maximum trail. And then price equals current price minus trail. Take that comment out. On the sell side, it's very similar, current price, but in this case I'm getting the ask price, which is the close price. The minimum profit is the opening price minus the profit. The minimum trail price is the minimum profit price minus that minimum, scroll back up, minus the minimum trail. And the trail range is the minimum trail price minus the current price. So it's reversed from current price minus trail price. The rest of these functions are very much the same. Trail is equal to minimum plus the trail range divided by 2. And again, if trail is less than min, return 0. If it's greater than max, then trail equals max. And then price is just current price plus trail in this case, where it was minus trail here. Because this is a sell trade, so the trailing price is above the current price. And then I'm just calling a normalized double on that, price and symbol info integer for symbol digits, and returning the price. I could have simplified some of this math. I just felt that it was more readable to go step by step through these values and use them rather than to try to compress this into less lines. And it really isn't going to make that much difference in processing speed. Now I'll go to MetaTrader 4 and I'll put the same function in there. The logic is the same, there are just different values. So position info, for example, gets replaced by order, but I'll go over there and show that now. So here is the get TS price in MetaTrader 4, same working variables, but for current price, I'm able to call order close price, which gives me either the buy close price or the sell close price. So I can initialize that once here. If the order type %2 instead of position type, these calculations are all the same, minimum profit, minimum trail and trail range. The same settings here for trail less than min or trail greater than max. And then I left the same comment from an earlier formula that I had. And then price is current price minus trail. And for the sell side, price is current price plus trail. And then the same normalized double. So the same function, I'm just using order values instead of position values. Just do a compile here to make sure I don't have any errors. I'll have to go to the MetaTrader 4 editor to compile this MA Cross TX MQ4. So I'll close this. So now I have the MA Cross with expanding trailing stop open in MetaTrader 4. I'll just compile. And that worked. So now I'll actually go back to MetaTrader and run this and see if I can catch some points where it's creating these trailing stops so that you can at least see one running. Now I'm using the debugger to set stop points so that I can stop at these places. So I have a sell trade that's been placed here. I'm using the crosshairs, And this is the point where it has first applied this stop loss. So my crosshairs might not be entirely accurate, but that stop loss, 97 points, 100 points. So it should be 100 points. That's the minimum profit, which it is, 100, 101, according to my crosshairs. And that should have happened when the current price down here is 50 points ahead of that minimum. And it is 56. Again, my crosshairs might not be entirely accurate, but around 50 points. So that's kicked in at the appropriate place. I'm just going to let that run a little bit, and you can see that this gap of 50 points between the current price and the stop loss price will gradually increase. Now, I haven't let that run for too long, but using my crosshairs now, setting them on the stop loss, I can see that that is now 71 points away from the best price. And I can also see that it is now 124 points away from the original opening price. So this is gradually moving, but at a slower rate than the price is falling. I don't know if this one is going to reach the maximum trailing stop, but let's let it run and see what happens. So that trade didn't reach the maximum trailing stop, or it has here, but previously it has gone back and hit the trailing stop there and then continued on. So let's just wait and see if we get something better on the buy side. So now on the buy side, I have an entry. There's the entry for the buy trade and the stop loss at around 100 points. Again, crosshairs might not be entirely accurate. And the current price at around 150 points ahead of the entry price. So I've had to let that run for a while before I found a point where we actually stopped at the maximum trailing stop. But this is a buy trade, and the gap from the current best price to the stop loss, 198, again crosshairs, around 200 points, which it's meant to be. So that's the maximum trailing stop amount. And at that point, the actual stop loss is in profit by 250 points. So this has gradually expanded the gap between the price and the trailing stop, and the trailing stop's followed. At this point, that trailing stop should follow the best price by that 200 points, rather than gradually getting further away. So I'm just going to let that run a little and see what happens. So I've just let that run a little. I didn't want to keep doing this for too long. The stop loss is now 265 points away from the entry price, but it is still only, and again crosshairs might not be entirely accurate, according to this 196, depends where I put it, around 200 points. So it's keeping pace with the price now, rather than gradually getting further away from the price. So I'm going to stop the demonstration there because I think we've seen the way this works. You have all of the code. I will be uploading the code for this version of the trailing stop, not the earlier version. If you want to get that code, go back and see the earlier video. But I will be uploading the code for this expanding trailing stop for you to download. If this has been useful to you, please click the like button. And if you want to see more of our videos, click subscribe, and you'll be notified if you click the bell icon when we release new videos. So until the next time, thank you for watching.